Hey, everybody. This is new for me. I'm Carolyn Eastman. I'm the president of the Society for Historians of the Early American Republic. And we are starting a live chat to talk about ways that you can apply to the conference, the ways that you can answer questions about the application process, whether to apply for a panel or an individual paper, and so on. So we are hoping that you will dive in and start asking questions. And Tim, I'm assuming that I will see questions as they start to appear. But anyway, but I thought I would first start out saying something that I think it was Nora Slonimsky mentioned in her short video. She mentioned the fact that it is preferable, if you can do it, to actually apply as part of a panel rather than sending in an individual paper, because it has been our experience that people who submit panels, um, just in general have a better shot at doing it. That is, there are ways that it can be difficult if you get, say, 10 different individual paper proposals. It can be difficult for the program committee to put those different people together with others on a panel. And so, if at all possible, see what you can do to apply as part of a panel. Um, let's see. I think it can be sometimes difficult to figure out how to find the people to serve on your panel with you. And in if you are having that kind of difficulty, I would suggest that you reach out to people in your program who've done it before, who've applied to conferences. Reach out to members of the program committee and just see if you can get some advice on other people who might be interested. They and people who are on the advisory council too may be um, feeling a lot of questions about different kinds of panel questions. And so they may be able to say, oh, well, there's one other person who's interested in doing a panel on, say, the history of abolition in the North. And they'll be able to put you together with others. Let's see, what else? What other questions should I be answering, Tim?
Um, I think for my first time, I think last year was SHEAR 2025 was my first opportunity to be at a SHEAR conference. It was my first like in-person conference, and I was organizing a panel. And I think the thing that also made me nervous was like, how do I find anybody? Like, how do I get in touch with people? How do I find a chair, which is nerve wracking because you're like, oh, how do I find a senior scholar who I've read their book? But I'm like, hi, I don't know you, but I kind of know you. Yeah, so I don't know if
Yeah.
you have.
Yeah, I've had that trouble too. When I was a grad student and I wanted to apply to the SHEAR conference, I sent cold emails to people, introducing myself and explaining that I had um, a couple of people for a panel, but I was looking for a commentator or I was looking for a chair. I'd often, because I assumed that academia was incredibly hierarchical, I would mention that my advisor had suggested that they might be good. Sometimes that can be helpful. I mean, sometimes, yeah, it's November right now. Professors are kind of overrun with writing letters of recommendation and grading papers and all the rest of it. And so knowing that someone they know has sent you to them can sometimes be an incentive for a person if they might have any hesitation. And finding people can be hard. And my sense of it increasingly is that I'll use different kinds of, social media. In the past, I've used SHEAR, so I've posted a notice on SHEAR saying that I'd like to put together a panel on something or a roundtable on something else, um, on a certain topic, and sort of ask for questions there. I mean, and that can be sort of nice in that the last time I did it was not that long ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I wanna say, and I got a bunch of people wanting to join a panel that I was doing on the history of celebrity in the early republic, which is a period when, the full sense of celebrity had not yet sort of come around because for a lot of reason, mass media wasn't quite as extensive as it became later on. And so, but I got a bunch of really interesting people proposing things. And it wasn't just people, I don't know, graduate students and so on. There were some senior scholars who were suggesting that their work might be appropriate. So, yeah, I mean, my sense is that there are a lot of different ways to reach out to people, and social media really isn't a bad one. The other thing I think, I mean, I'm sort of obsessive about answering my email. It sometimes takes me a while because right now there's a lot of it, but I think that if somebody approached me and said, I'm interested in putting together a panel on this subject, and I'm just having such trouble figuring out what, who I should ask, who might be available. My sense is that people like me will respond. It may take us a few days to respond, but we are going to say, "Oh, you know who you should ask is so and so because it really enjoy coming to share conferences. I don't think they've presented for a while, and I think they would be really, eager to join a panel like this." So, yeah, I think that's a really good idea.
I would also plug our Sheer Excel sheet. The Excel spreadsheet is really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, yeah, we should, in my next email to the membership, I should send that out more generally because that can be really helpful for identifying different panels that are underway. So yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and I when I was putting together my panel last year, I advertised on the spreadsheet, I advertised on the on HShear. I kind of just threw it everywhere to see what would stick, who would, and I think both the spreadsheet and the and HShear the spreadsheet helped me get two other panelists because I already had a panelist from UConn, and then the HShear got me a chair. So
Oh, see, that's great. So
yeah,
sometimes it takes a little bit more work, but ultimately you get a bunch of people. That's really terrific.
yeah,
Oh, and I should mention too, I mean, one of the things that's really hard for especially earlier career grad students is that the program committee really discourages people applying with other people from their same program. So, fellow grad students at your university or your advisor or another member of the department that you're a part of. And so, and I don't know if this is still true, but they sometimes discourage, say, a whole bunch of people all from just the Philadelphia region or something like that. That may not be as much of a problem anymore. But I'm not sure about that. Anyway, and that can really put a burden on grad students trying to find people outside of their known circles. And so all the more reason to use all of these techniques to find more people. Yeah, yeah,
and
definitely.
I with our social media, I've tried to retweet anything that's kind of if we're tagged and like, hey, I'm trying to put this panel together. I've tried to retweet it to kind of see if there's more, if anybody else out there is like, oh my gosh, yeah, I would love to be on this panel, and just so they see it on
That's
like a
great.
platform.
That's fabulous, yes. Yeah, and it also seems to me that, we could talk really briefly about, how nervous you should be when you're going to SHEAR, and I'm curious, Tim, you told me earlier that last summer's SHEAR was the first time that you presented. So tell me how it went. Were you, overcome with nervousness before you presented?
I was definitely nervous before I presented, 'cause, I just hadn't I've presented the work that I was working on before, but, like, in my department, so it was a little less nerve-wracking to be amongst everybody who I already know. Nobody's
Yeah.
gonna ask a terrible, tricky question that I'm like, "Oh, no." But I think I was more nervous, than I needed to be. I think everybody, even afterwards, I think I didn't get any, like, crazy questions that were like, "Oh, no, why am I getting this question?" or "Why didn't you look at such and such, and that's such and such?" I got a lot of questions that were just helpful, and people it felt very communal. It felt like we were all in conversation about things. All of the questions were directed to everybody and not so much like, "I need you to tell me this thing about your project," and ignoring everybody else, so
Oh, that's really good to hear. And I think that's pretty common. I mean, every once in a while I do hear that someone gets a sort of hostile question, or it's like somebody in the audience is trying to catch them up in something. But in general, I think that the really wonderful thing about a summer conference is that we're all just a little bit more relaxed than we might be during the school year, and most of us remember how nerve-wracking it is to give your first paper or even your second paper, and so I think people try to ask pretty gracious questions in general, and we want you to move on with your work. We want you to take this work and develop it as a great dissertation chapter or a great chapter of your book, or maybe even a great article for the Journal of the Early Republic. That's a really important thing for us. And so I really like the idea that presenting a conference paper can be the first way that you open up your work to the examination of the larger profession and to the kinds of questions that can help you constructively move forward with it. I think that's really important. Yeah. I don't think it's possible not to be nervous. It's
mhm,
it's a little bit like, um, uh, we were talking about taking your comps.
mhm,
You can't help but be nervous ahead of time, even if people in your department tell you that they cannot remember the last time someone did not pass their comps.
mhm,
You still walk into that room figuring that you are going to be the first person in modern memory to not pass your comps, and it's irrational, but there you have it. I think that nervousness is a normal human reaction to the craziness of academia. But I do think that the minute you get into the reading of your paper and the discussion of it, that you will find yourself in the middle of a great conversation, just the way you do after you answer the very first question in your comps. Then all of a sudden you settle in and you start to feel comfortable, and it's much, much better going forward. Yeah. Um, all right. What other questions should I be answering, Tim?
um one thing that tripped me up a little bit when I was doing the application is like, how do I put together a diversity statement? What does that
Oh, yeah.
entail? So I think that's just something that was like, oh, what am I doing here? What does this mean?
Yeah, yeah. And this is something that has increasingly been important to us at Shear, just making sure that every panel doesn't have, say, a bunch of people at all Ivy League institutions, a bunch of people who are all men, a bunch of people who are all former students of a certain prominent advisor or something like that. We're really trying to make sure that as much as we can, every panel has a degree of diversity. And that doesn't necessarily just mean racial diversity, although we very much encourage racial diversity if that's possible, but have people who aren't just men or aren't just women, if possible, have people um, who represent a number of different kinds of career paths or institutions. So you might find somebody who teaches at a community college and someone who's a public historian, someone who is at a teaching intensive university or college. And so I think there's a lot of different paths to diversity, but as much as possible, I think it's easy to read the CVs that people send you who are gonna join your panel, and it's easy there to look at them and say, "Oh, okay, there's, I've got this person who's teaching at a liberal arts college, and I've got this person who works at the Smithsonian, and this person who, teaches at an HBCU," and so on. So, yeah, there's a lot of different paths to that, and so don't just feel that SHEAR is looking for a kind of tokenism, whatever that might mean. It really is a guarantee that when we all show up to the conference, we have one of everyone, the same way we have one of everyone as members of SHEAR. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And it also doesn't have to be really long. It can be a very short paragraph.
I think for at least for my panel, it was kind of like I was the youngest as far as a grad student program goes, and then we had people who were like an assistant professor, an associate professor, a tenure track who's written multiple books, who's our chair. So it felt like there was a diversity in like where we are in our career. There was also a diversity in like the institutions. Two of our professors were from like religious institutions, so it was like, oh, how did they
Oh,
approach
yeah.
the conversation from a religious heavy institution in comparison to like UConn, which I'm at, and it's the more, it's a general um, educational facility, so it doesn't have that religious emphasis.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's really good advice, I think. Um, yeah, one of the things that I've been wrestling with just lately is that it is often not easy to find people who aren't at academic institutions for your panels. It's hard to find people who are active researchers, active scholars who are working in public history or other kinds of institutions. It's really hard to find independent scholars. And I think that because of those difficulties, because it's not like SHEAR has a membership database that you can search for people who share your research interests. I've been trying to figure out how we can establish a means, maybe a little bit like Women Also Know History, the way that that's a big database of all kinds of people in the field, and not just people who are PhDs or on the PhD track, also people who have other kinds of degrees that are relevant to the work that they're doing. How can we make this more accessible and bring more people into that conversation? And actually, while I'm on the topic of Women Also Know History, if you're looking for someone for your panel, you may actually check out that great database because there's all kinds of ways that you can search it for people doing, say, military history of the American Revolution, and then you can identify potential panelists. But yeah, so I mean, the problem with all of that is that having an online database costs money, and because SHEAR is extremely poor, we that would be difficult, but a bunch of us are thinking about sort of how to make that more accessible. The other thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm hoping perhaps to get one of my students involved in this once she finishes her degree, is putting together a roommate matching service because, a lot of us, we don't get a lot of money to help us attend conferences, and they can be incredibly expensive once you just look at the hotel alone, right? And that's on top of the flight or the meals and everything else. And so I'm hoping to put together some kind of a way. She's really savvy when it comes to database questions. And so I'm hoping that for this coming conference, for people who really are on limited incomes and have little support from their institutions, we can find a matching service for that to make it more affordable.
I
We'll
think one of
see.
the yes, I think one of the things that I saw a lot for people who weren't able to attend was just how wonderful their panel would be like, I will present their paper while they're not here,
Oh,
which I think is such a great thing that they can still they're still part of the panel, but they're like, I couldn't come, I just couldn't afford it, but my co-panelists will present for me, or the chair will present the paper for me. So it still gives you an opportunity to have your work shown, even if you're not able to be there. So that might be another way to kind of think about how do I still participate if I can't actually afford to come, or something happens and I'm not able to come. Like with I
right.
think right last year, we Adam Rothman was in jury duty and he couldn't come and so Seth Rockman kind of came in and took over for him. So
Yeah, exactly. And I shouldn't speak to this just yet because we are still in the talking phase and the mulling it over phase, but I'm hoping that there might be a way that SHEAR can step in and offer at least some kind of travel relief to people, so that the conference isn't so, um daunting and inaccessible for people with, limited incomes, with, institutions that have pulled their funding and so on. I don't know to what extent we can do that for people, but it's a really important aspect of the general sense that we ought to be making it more accessible and really bringing people in as opposed to just making it for people who are members of the haves in society, right? I mean, it's really tough. So, if you're an independent scholar, coming to the conference can cost, I don't know, $1,000 or something. It's a lot of money. And so, yeah, it's been on a lot of our minds for a long time. And so, yeah, let's hope we can make something happen. I think that would be really wonderful. Yeah.
one of the I also think what we should emphasize is like making sure that everybody can attend, because I think one of the most exciting panels I saw was like a panel where there was a K through 12 educator, a there was Anna Law, who does political science, scholar, and then there was a scholar who hadn't been to SHEAR in like 20 years since grad school, and he had a new project, and he's at
Oh.
a college. So it's such a great panel to see like this diversity of people who are kind of in different areas of research. Even, I mean, obviously Anna Law has been working on her book for a very long time, and she's in poli sci, but history has become kind of a part of her work as well. So I think those types of opportunities are also exciting, and it is something that we want to emphasize.
Yeah, I know that our immediate past president, Manisha Sinha, would absolutely agree with me on this. We've talked so much about how valuable coming to the conference is. And of course, I don't want to say that it's not a good idea to hand your paper over to someone else to read it at the conference. I mean, I think that that's what has to happen sometimes, right? But coming to the conference can be such a meaningful experience in allowing you, sometimes incidentally and sometimes on purpose, meeting all kinds of people and finding a community. I mean, I think that one of the really wonderful things for me when I mean, honestly, in grad school, I was putting conference expenses on a credit card, and that was not a good idea, but that's what I had to do, you know? I mean, my program just didn't offer very much support, and so not to mention the I was terrified that I'd be wearing the wrong clothes, so I went shopping before and anyway, but I do think that what I found when I went was, a world of fellow grad students who, had all kinds of ideas and had ways of asking questions that were really inspiring to me. That I also met junior faculty and mid-career people and even senior people who were, amazingly to me, willing to talk to me. And I think that the thing is that you never know who you might wind up talking to in the line to get snacks at a reception or sitting next to you in another panel or getting coffee at one of the breaks. And it's those kinds of meetings that can really be meaningful for people moving forward, helping you with your career. I mean, one of those people I met at a early SHEAR conference, I wound up asking her to write letters for me when I was on the job market. And so, you never know what's going to happen. And so, I mean, that's why so many of us feel that although of course we know that we have to find ways to bring all kinds of people in, including those who can't make it to the conference. We would ideally like to try to bring you to the conference if that's possible. Um, and um, yeah, anyway, I feel really strongly about that. So it's one of the reasons that we've done so much plugging of applying to this summer's shear because it can be so meaningful for people. So I was just emailing with a grad student of mine who was having trouble. Whew, if this happens, she had wound up finding two different people to serve on her panel with her, but it turned out that one of them was the advisor for the other. And because of the rules about diversity, she's gonna have to change that lineup. And so she and I have been talking about possible other people, including I mean, I just, went ahead and emailed a couple of people I knew, and put her in touch with them, with the hope that maybe one of them would ultimately agree to serve on that panel. So it is something to keep in mind, though, that we're trying to avoid any sense of, I don't know, nepotism or anyway, too closely aligned circles of people. But I do think that again, when you run into those kinds of problems, or if you run into the problem that somebody says, "Well, I I really don't know if I can attend, and I'm probably not gonna be able to because of funding issues," to reach out to other members of the program committee and elected members, officers of the institution to see if you can find somebody else to serve on your panel with you.
We had for our panel, one of our panelists had to drop out at the last minute because of a health issue. Um, so I think
It
there's
happens.
also concerns about that, and I think um, when we did get that, we kind of made adjustments of how much time we wanted to talk for, those types of things. So there is always kind of fail safes of like making sure that you, I don't know, like if you have more that you want to say, at least have it on the side so that you know that something could happen and you might have extra time to just start to talk about something else that you didn't get a chance to talk about just because of how the world works and people just somebody will get sick and they won't be able to come. So
It happens all the time, and that is something that the program committee is always thinking about, especially once, May and June come along, they wind up having to make small adjustments to different panels, and, I mean, we always hope for the best. We always hope that people will be able to come, but I know that when I was on the program committee, we had people, they got a job, sometime during the spring. They weren't able to sign their contract until May, and then they knew that they were gonna be spending July packing and moving, and or or there was a family health crisis, or there was, a baby who came a little bit earlier than expected, or, there's all kinds of things that happen. This is life. And so, yeah, I think that kind of flexibility really, really helps. So, for example, one thing I saw someone do one time was, I think it was a initially a panel of 4 paper presenters, and 2 of them weren't able to come, and the other 2 sort of lost their mind, thinking, "Wait, I can't give a 40-minute paper. Everyone will fall asleep, in the middle of it." And so what they did was they did something really creative. They wound up asking the chair of the committee to start out with, say, a list of 4 key questions that the 2 papers had brought up. And then the paper presenters, did their thing and the commentator gave a comment, but then they opened it up to the audience and the conversation was fabulous. It was actually especially wonderful because sometimes people talk for too long, a real no-no, I have to say, because so many members of the audience will wind up sitting there thinking, "Oh, I can hardly wait to ask a question," but then they don't do it if the paper presenters take too much time. So yeah, I think that there's all kinds of ways to roll with the punches if you do have people drop out, but don't underestimate the audience. The audience really, they have a lot to say. And sometimes it's great, and I mean, not always, but almost always, it's really great. People love to join in. Yeah.
I think also something to think about as you're writing the paper is like timing yourself ahead of time, making sure that you know
Oh,
how much time you have, how much you can read in a certain amount of time. Um, because I
yeah.
think it's such a key thing to be cognizant of, like how much time you're taking up, because there's going to be four. You have three other panelists, typically maybe two other panelists, but you have other panelists who are also going to be talking. So you want to make sure that you're staying within a certain time limit so you're not hogging up too much of the time, because I've definitely been on panels where it's been like, okay, they took up more time than I did, and I was so like adamant about, oh, I can't talk about that because it's going to take up too much time.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah. I mean, I always time myself. And so in the past, let me think, my rule of thumb was that if you're speaking for 20 minutes, if that's what you've been given, then an 8-page Times New Roman double-spaced paper is what you want with normal 1-inch margins, don't mess with that. Um, if you have a 15-minute slot, then that's 6 pages double spaced. It's not a lot. Yeah, and you don't want to have, say, a 10-page paper and then read it really fast. That is so annoying. I I honestly a lot of people have a hard time understanding, a paper that's delivered at a clip, and so, yeah, the more you can deliver it and, at a sort of measured pace and put emphasis on the places that you wanna place emphasis on, the better. Also, if you have illustrations that you're showing on a PowerPoint slide and you wanna sort of move away from your text and talk about those images, give yourself extra time to do it. Don't think that that isn't gonna count toward your 15 or 20 minutes. It's really important to know that that can actually add significant amounts of time. And everyone hates it when the chair of the committee is holding up a sign saying, "Wrap it up," or, that's never a good thing. Um, the other thing is that you want to write a paper that you can deliver comfortably. And so that often means making word choices that allow you to feel comfortable rather than stumbling over a complicated sentence. You probably want to shorten your sentences to some extent. Um, I feel, too, as if one of the things that I mean, a lot of us, we love to go deep into our analysis. We love to spend a lot of time in that big middle of the paper we're delivering, and they kind of give short shrift to the intro and the conclusion, but there is nothing more satisfying than really knowing in the first 3 minutes of a person's delivery what they're doing with their piece, and then that person taking time at the end to satisfyingly conclude whatever it is they wanna say. That is really important for orally delivered material because we're not able to look at it on the page. So whereas, I mean, say an article, a journal article, might have a fairly minimal intro and conclusion because there's so much happening in the middle. A 20-minute paper or a 15-minute paper, actually the percentage of intro and conclusion to the middle goes way up, you know? So yeah, it's, delivering a paper, it's a bit of an art form. And, I think that, um, there's some people who might encourage you, very senior scholars might encourage you to deliver your paper extemporaneously or don't read it from the page. I I don't know how I could have done that as a younger scholar. I was always, even when I wasn't freaking out ahead of time. I was always jittery. And so having the words on the page, it's such a relief to me, to many of us. I mean, you'll have time later on when you're super senior, super fancy, whoever, to be able to do that. But don't worry about reading. But you want to make it as dynamic as you possibly can. And so you want to be able to look up from your page to look at the audience. You want to be able to look around the room. You want to be able to um, look as if you're having an enjoyable time doing your stuff. So don't start reading your paper and then just go, You know, there's a lot of ways that you can send the message that even you might be bored with your own material, and that's not a good idea. And as a grad student, I think it's a good idea to ask a couple of friends to listen to a draft of your paper before you deliver it, just so that they can help you with maybe a confusing sentence there in the middle. Or I remember one of my friends said, wait a second, I'm on about page 6 or something, you brought up this whole new term and I didn't know what you were talking about. So yeah, getting people to just listen, especially to that first or second conference paper you deliver, is really helpful.
Yes, I think I also have, like, I have my partner read it who has no idea what's going on. He's not a
Yes.
historian. It They're much more helpful in understanding, like, okay, I'm trying to follow the plot of what you're talking about, not so much trying to critique my footnotes. More interested in critiquing how it sounds on the paper, how it reads. So I think that's also helpful to bring in somebody who not a historian or is not in your field per se, that's just like coming at this with fresh eyes and no knowledge.
That's right, and people like that can also help you widen the lens, to make your paper even more appealing to wider groups of people. I think that's incredibly helpful. And Tim, you just brought up something that I think is really important for the when you're turning in a paper ahead of time for a commentator. Make sure that you give that person your footnotes. So even if your paper, you've very carefully done 8 double-spaced pages or 6 double-spaced pages, put the endnotes in, or just go ahead and stick the footnotes in after the fact, after you know that you've got it at the right length. I know that that's really important because if somebody's gonna be looking at your paper as both something that you deliver orally and as something that potentially you'll, excuse me, be publishing down the line, that can be really helpful for them to be able to say, you're drawing on this fascinating group of archival documents that I didn't know about. And what you do with them, they'll be able to offer a much better comment. Yeah, the more you can engage the people on your panel in the work that you're doing, the better. I actually encourage people, I know it's not always possible, but I encourage people to share their papers from one panelist to the other so that everybody knows what's gonna be happening during the session, because you never know when one of those panelists might, I don't know, write a letter for you or tell you about a certain kind of fellowship that you didn't know about or introduce you to somebody who can be really helpful to your future career. Yeah, definitely turn in a piece of writing that feels like something that is the beginning of something larger. The other reason to do that, though, it occurs to me, is that the co-editors of the Journal of the Early Republic spend a lot of time attending sessions with the hope that they can identify people who will be interested in turning their conference paper into an article for the journal. Or they might also say, well, this isn't quite a Journal of the Early Republic piece, but you should consider, approaching early American literature, or you should consider approaching an art history journal or another kind of one of our related fields. And so the more that you might be able to maybe hand your polished paper to one of these co-editors or somebody else, the better. I mean, there are people who will actually ask you for a copy of the paper you've delivered after the fact so that they can remember and, maybe engage you in the future in their work.
I think, especially with your comment about the footnotes, it was helpful for, I think, your chair to also suggest secondary sources. I know at least my chair was like, "Oh, I see that you've cited yada all these different historians, but there's this other article that really is saying the same thing you're saying. You should look at them, and that'll help you to kind of ground your argument a little bit stronger." Or I think it also helps not just with, oh, these are great primary sources, but also, oh, have you looked at these other secondary sources that might help? Specifically, it's often with your argument that you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're so right. Yeah. And I I know that in my experience, that is a good proportion of the comments that I've received on my own work, which is that kind of, have you looked at this? Have you looked at this? And so, I wind up with, all these notes to myself that I've got to look up this book. And there's this book that's gonna be coming out in October, and I've got to be checking that one out and so on. So yeah, that can be really, really helpful. I wanted to maybe mention one other thing that was raised by Honor Sachs and Will McIntosh during their YouTube presentation on how to get the most out of conferences. One of the things that they both mentioned, which I think is wonderful, is that before the conference, you can go through the draft program and start to identify people who you might want to meet, people whose books you've read and enjoyed, people who've been influential to you, but also other people who seem to be doing really interesting work. And I think that what's really wonderful about that is that I know that when I was a grad student and I felt somewhat isolated from the larger world of academia, I went to a conference, but I emailed somebody ahead of time just saying, I saw you're giving this paper. That sounds so interesting, and it's parallel to my own work. Would you like to get a coffee? And just sort of, making a contact ahead of time. I wound up a few times either grabbing lunch with somebody or meeting them at the grad student lunch or sitting next to them at one of the receptions or, that kind of thing. There's all kinds of different options. Um, it was also helpful. I think that maybe this says more about me than anybody else, but I was worried about just being a wallflower at some of those events. And so setting myself up with somebody who could sort of be my buddy at a reception or have someone to talk to over breakfast even, that was a really nice way for me to feel that I was starting to build a community of people, and I think it's one of the most important things about the work that we do. A lot of being a research scholar can just feel isolating. It just, it's you sitting in front of your computer trying to think of a sentence and trying to be smart. I don't know. It's like, I don't know, but I'm always reminded of Winnie the Pooh who would go to his thoughtful place and try to think of a thought. Going to a conference and being able to sit down and talk with people about their ideas, about how their dissertation is unfolding, about how they're transforming their dissertation into a book, how their experience working with a journal editor, all of that can just be so interesting, but it's also a way to form a community. And I think that more than anything, SHEAR has always tried to be really a good place for the formation of those communities. And so it's something to think about when whether or not you're on the program, when the program comes out and you're making plans to go to the conference, see if you can line up maybe grabbing a bite with somebody who sounds really interesting, or sitting down with them between sessions, or going up to them after a panel and just telling them how much you enjoyed their work and how interested you are in their topic and everything else. Yeah, it's, I think, really, really helpful. And I kept meaning to emphasize that again after Will and Honor were talking about those kinds of strategies for getting the most out of conferences. I don't know, Tim, what else should we be talking about? Is there anything else?
Um, hmm, I'm not sure we've hit a lot of the important things, the things that I think, especially when I was doing my first panel, that I think tripped me up the most was just, yeah, I don't know, just like making sure that everybody's organized. That can sometimes be a little. There was definitely some moments where I was like, "Oh no, it's going to be due very soon," and then somebody was didn't have their CV to me, or they didn't have their abstract or their little. So it was just like, "Oh no, this is going to be so nerve wracking," but it didn't work out. But I think that is
That
something else.
That is nerve-wracking, especially when the deadline time is ticking down and, everything is due by midnight on whatever day, and you're thinking, "What is wrong with this person that they can't send me their brief vita, or, they can't, get me that abstract," or whatever it is. Yeah, yeah, it does take some wrangling. It's all about herding cats sometimes. But hopefully, you also learn that when you're on the other side and somebody else is doing all the organizing of the panel, that you will be that good citizen who gets everything in on time, right?
I also think a good thing that I did with kind of organizing the panel was kind of delegating some things. Feel like
Oh.
I didn't write the diversity statement. I had somebody else who was like, I can write the diversity statement, or the panel description. I had somebody else who was like, here's a draft of a panel description that I just came up with off the top of my head. It was helpful to be able to have, to, even as I was organizing the whole panel, to have somebody else delegate and handle some other logistics that I was just like, oh, I'm doing X, Y, and Z right now. I can't also be doing this as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Um, so pivoting just a little bit from the conference per se, I thought I would also mention, I'm hoping that this gets some interest. We are going to set up a second sheer community. I think Molly Nebbiolo, who's been organizing this, is going to call it Tea Time again in December. So we're hoping to have another maybe hour, hour and a half when people can get together. And one of the things we've been thinking a lot about is considering that. I don't know if you've heard, but Ken Burns has a new documentary series on the American Revolution coming out, that has been getting a lot of attention, of course. we're thinking that maybe there might be ways for SHEAR members to gather together virtually to talk about their responses to the documentary. A documentary that, by the way, is going to feature a lot of SHEAR members. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the kind of narrative that he winds up telling and the extent to which it encompasses a lot of the cutting edge research that SHEAR members have been doing for years now. That'll be really interesting. So we're exploring the possibility of these kinds of online discussion groups. I'm not sure quite sure at this point what that's going to look like, but I have smart people who are thinking already about it. Um, the other thing that we'd like to do is have an informal gathering during the January meeting of the American Historical Association in Chicago. And what we're thinking there is um, maybe we'll just identify a bar near the conference hotels where SHEAR members can gather and just, bend elbows together and have a chance to meet, aside from the complete madness that the AHA can often be. It's a way for people with shared research interests and often friendships to gather together and meet one another. So I think that'll be great. I'll be sending out more information about that soon. Um, and do I have any other announcements? I don't think so. Those are 2 things that are on our agenda right now. Um, but yes, I'll be sending out more news on all of these things very soon. Well, what do you think, Tim? Should we keep going? Should we call it? What do you think?
Um, yeah, I think we're at about 51 minutes, 50 minutes, which I think about an hour long conversation. I think we've kind of hit a lot of the important parts. And this live stream will be saved for our YouTube. And I will blast it across our social medias as well, so that people who obviously didn't get to attend can watch the video back and hear all of the great things that we talked about.
That sounds fabulous. And again, to anyone who wasn't able to attend, g get in touch with us if we can answer any of your questions. We, our contact information is widely available, so yes, don't be strangers. We love our SHEAR members, and we're trying to make it ever more inclusive. The bigger the tent, the better here. So, thank you all for coming, and most of all, Tim, thank you for organizing all of this behind the scenes. Thank you so much. All right. Bye, everybody.